Hi, Ryan Reynolds here for Mint Mobile. Are you looking for a beach read this summer? May I suggest your big wireless bill? It's got suspense, mystery, a slightly flat, emotional arc, and a shocking twist where you realize you've been overpaying the entire time. Fortunately, though, Mint's story is better. Every plan, $15 a month. Even unlimited. That's it. Happy ending. Zero tears. Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3 months, $90 for 6 months, or $180 for 12-month plan required. $15 per month equivalent. Taxes and fees extra. Initial plan term only. Greater than 50 gigabytes may slow when network is busy. See terms.
Yesterday I was told by someone that I really think did know that it was between Shabana Mahmood and Ed Miliband. But until it's done, it's not done. Yeah. And breaking news, John Healey is Chancellor of the Exchequer, and I can tell you that was not expected.
No.
It was not expected. What a surprise and shocker that one is.
Quiet Riot.
Welcome to Quiet Riot. I'm Andreou. Now, one of the peculiar aspects of Burnham becoming Prime Minister without a contest is that we go into this knowing not a huge amount about his philosophy or plan for government. All we have seen is what he has chosen to reveal. So we promised you that as soon as we had details of the Treasury team he put in place, we would try to offer a view, or at the very least, an educated discussion about the economic backbone of Burnhamism. Now, I do understand the desire to mutter, why should I care about this, and hit next on your podcast app, but everything you do care about does rely on this. To paraphrase Nobel laureate Robert Solow's description of an economics conference, it's all very mysterious, the discussion is very abstract and full of insider's language, people break into hysterical laughter for incomprehensible reasons, but I would like to assure the people out there that although the battles that are fought in conferences like this appear to be fought with antique pop guns, the bullets are real. To help us begin to piece together an outline of the economic shape of this new administration, we turn to, who else? Our favorite orthodox economist with a small and I suspect a capital O, as she is a fellow Greek. Welcome back to Quiet Riot fixture, Vicky Pryce. Welcome, Vicky.
Hello, and thank you very much and for that introduction. And indeed, I am a fellow Greek, and the Greeks are looking at all this. I've just come back, in fact, from Athens, with amazement in how we just changed prime ministers and how perhaps policy could change just like that.
But also I think because Starmer had quite a different reputation abroad than he had at home, I think the bafflement has been increased for all my foreign friends. They go, why did you get rid of him? He was quite good, wasn't he?
There was certainly an element of that.
Yeah.
They could quite get it, but also the ease with which it happened.
Yes.
I mean, maybe that's an example for other countries. I mean, why do we need to have coups? Why don't we just do things this way?
I mean, yeah, maybe there is something to our system. We have a live show coming up at the end of the month in association with the Lincoln Project, where they will try to explain American politics to us and we will try to explain British politics to them. So it will be fun to explain all this to them. Vicky, we said about a month ago that we'd get together and have a chat when the new Chancellor and the team at the Treasury were appointed, because that would be the first time we got a hint of the sort of economic direction of Burnham. Now, Healey was a pretty unexpected appointment. How were the media so blindsided, do you think?
Well, it's interesting that it wasn't just the media, I suppose. I mean, probably quite a large part of the Labour Party was wondering as well what was going to happen. And the media, of course, saw Ed Miliband and Shabana Mahmood go in together, sort of almost holding hands. And in fact, some people were speculating, is this going to be a job share?
Or are they going to be made to duke it out between them in the interview?
Well, absolutely. Or locked into separate rooms under torture and then sort of finally agree. It is really interesting that this happened. But of course, it's worth also bearing in mind that John Healey in some ways has been rewarded for the fact that it was his resignation that triggered the final decision, if you like, of Keir Starmer to go, because this was quite serious and quite substantial. Yes, okay, West Streeting had done something similar before, but to argue quite significantly about not just the running of the country more generally, if you like, which
But the
perhaps we're
security of the country.
But to talk about the security of the country and the defense, which had become such an important part of what everyone was focusing on, given the geopolitics, was very significant. Maybe it's a reward for that, but it's also, I think, trying to get the whole party to approve this position, because he's somewhere in the center where he does satisfy the left wing of the party, his earlier links with trade unions and so on, and the right wing in the sense that he's not as soft left as Ed Miliband was. So not as right wing as perhaps Shabana Mahmood is perceived to be, but not as left wing as Ed Miliband is perceived to be, but somewhere in the middle. And I think the markets have responded reasonably well. And of course, with his appointment, what you have seen is that defense stocks shot up.
There's an expectation, there's an expectation that he will put his money where his mouth was a month ago, as it were. Yes, I think I agree. It seemed to me that that was the fatal blow to Starmer, and I said so at the time, and a lot of people sort of argued with me, but it seemed to me that the moment your defense secretary says you are leaving us vulnerable to external risk, there is no coming back really for a prime minister from that. When the FT, the Bible, is predicting so confidently Chancellor X, only for Chancellor Y to be announced, can there be financial repercussions to the media getting it so wrong? Is there a risk that there's a market reaction simply because someone else had been priced in by markets, regardless of whether it's good or bad, better or worse?
There's been a bit of a market reaction in the sense that 10-year yields have gone up a little bit. Is that because they had priced it in wrongly? Possibly, but of course we've also got the problems with Iran and the fact, yes.
So they're going up a little bit for everyone at the moment.
They are going up a little bit for everyone, but the problem in the UK is that, of course, we started this crisis with the highest interest rates, highest yields, and highest inflation among the G7, and that's been a problem. So if the market starts going up, then that's a serious problem in terms of how much you pay for your debt and also what happens to mortgages and everything else. We've already seen mortgage rates repriced up just in the last 24 hours. The markets will want to see a little bit more of what is planned.
The first two policies announced, Vicky, have been eradicating homelessness or rough sleeping, to be more precise, without a specific budget, really, or time limit. And a 6-month relief from VAT on household energy bills to be paid out of money that was going to be found for digital IDs and now can be found for this instead. The political messaging of this is clear, I think. Is the economic messaging clear?
Well, the rough sleeping itself is likely to cost about $3 billion a year. The question is what happens after, since, then they might be able to also get their life back in some sort of order and therefore may not need that much support. So if it's a continuing $3 billion, that's a different issue. But, over a period of time to get to that point, it will cost about $3 billion and then see what happens after that. The cut in VAT or eliminating VAT from household bills, that, of course, is meant to be costing something like 800 million in this financial year. So it's meant to start in October, finishing next April. I mean, that's quite a hefty sum. And the question is, of course, whether it's going to carry on after that. But the interesting thing is that is supposed to be paid for by the digital ID cost that was meant to be, as you rightly said, a part of the Starmer program. Well, the interesting thing is that according to the OBR, that hasn't really been budgeted for. There isn't any funding that has been directly allocated to achieving that. So there is a big question mark as to where that money will be found from, unless there are other efficiencies that you can find elsewhere. Of course, everyone talks about efficiencies, even when you look at defense, as we touched on that earlier. John Healey knows full well, because he knows the defense industry, is that there are loads of things that are going on which are quite inefficient, and you can improve the way in which the various parts of defense operate, whether you're talking about the army or the navy, for example. You could also reprioritize where some of the money goes to make it more efficient. But it is, at least he knows where that money can perhaps be sort of saved for the future. It's really interesting when there isn't anything for ID to save from, because it hasn't even been sorted out where some of the money was meant originally to be coming from. So this is an extra spending, really, or an extra loss of revenue, which somehow or other will need to be found from somewhere else.
Quiet. Riot.
In terms of the overall budget, it's obviously a very small amount. It could even be absorbed by the overhead, although that would really send the wrong message if the first thing you did, you were eating into your overhead rather than trying to balance the books. Is there a danger that they get the balance wrong between what they need to announce in terms of giving really their identity to society out there, that this is what this administration is about, which, we discussed a lot, was the real mistake with the Starmer government, that it did things and didn't really fit them into an overall narrative. And there really is a stark contrast between the very first thing that Starmer announces when he comes in is doing away with the winter fuel allowance, and the very first thing that is announced by Burnham when he comes in is eradicating rough sleeping. Those give two very different headlines to that government. But is there a danger that by announcing a lot of socially pleasing policies, you end up annoying the markets in a kind of Liz Trussy way that goes, where is this money coming from? You're not showing us your workings.
You're quite right, though, what you said earlier about the costs perhaps not being that great because, of course, the government spends over $1 trillion. So this amount is just not significant when you add up the rough sleeping eradication.
And there might be a cost to allowing rough sleeping to go on.
Yeah.
Of course, there is a cost to policing, there is a cost to local businesses, there is a cost to the local council.
Yeah.
So maybe there are also some savings on the other side of the ledger.
Yes, except they come in the longer term, and the markets are going to look at what does it mean, for this financial year, next financial year. So they are going to be slightly concerned, without any doubt. And of course, when you look at some of the other areas that this government could do things to improve the revenue take that there is at present, which they absolutely need to improve, one of the things that was discussed earlier was the fuel duty and whether that would be increasing in line with inflation in the future. Because, as you know, it's been frozen since 2010-11, and then it was cut even further temporarily a few years ago. So that hasn't been restored. It was meant to start getting restored in September. That would be raising, quite a few billion if you were doing this right from here on. Now, if indeed, just going back to your question, if this is meant to be crowd pleasing and cost of living improvement, which is now at the center of what Andy Burnham is going to try and do in his first week, months, and so on, then what you have is restrictions on doing some of the things which are right. We should really have had fuel duty rise in line with inflation. That would, in fact, fund the extra defense spending, which John Healey would very much have liked to have seen before.
Yeah.
So you're absolutely right. I think the trying to move in the other direction, in other words, even though you may talk about getting more people back to work and all that sort of stuff and doing something about welfare in the future, and for the moment, that tone and this attempt perhaps make both consumers and, certainly mainly the consumers, but possibly also businesses up to a point, feel happier by not raising, because of course the whole logistics sector will not want any increases in fuel duty. They're already facing quite a lot of extra increases because of petrol prices, diesel prices going up, and so on, all the other costs associated with the supply chain disruptions, etc., that we have seen. But it does restrict what you can do. That's why people are beginning to say, right, okay, so if that's how it's going to be, what sort of taxes are they going to be raising? That's when wealth taxes come back again into the discussion, where increasing, higher rate of income tax comes in.
Or introducing another band at the top, I think, is one thing that I've heard a little bit on the rumour mill.
Absolutely. All sorts of things. Well, or even looking at capital gains tax and equalizing that, or even looking at inheritance tax. What this does do, unfortunately, you and I have discussed this before, is that because of all the mistakes, if you want to call them that the previous administration made in terms of not dealing with the black hole they found immediately by reversing some of their policies, which would have been so much easier, such as the national insurance contributions cut, which Jeremy Hunt had done on employees before the election of July 24, they got stuck with that and they did various things. What that did is stop growth over the period when people were waiting for these tax changes to happen. The following year, we had almost something similar. So we had 2 years when from the middle of the year, nothing happens in the economy. And then it's really hard to catch up. And it is just possible, even though we may have a budget now in early October, that again, this flatlining in the economy, which we have seen since the first quarter, is going to just continue. And if that is the case, you get less growth, you get less investment, hiring sort of stalls. What we've seen with the unemployment data that's just come out is that it's leveling off. It's not going up or going down, but it's leveling off. So no one is really hiring anyone, if they can avoid it, waiting for things to happen. We've had tighter controls right now, which are happening on employment. As far as businesses are concerned, that increases costs. So there's quite a lot of disincentive to do anything major while you're waiting for those tax increases, if you are trying at the same time to just please the consumer so that they continue to vote for the Labour Party.
Quiet, Riot.
At Blinds.com, it's not just about window treatments. It's about you, your style, your space, your way. Whether you DIY or want the pros to handle it all, you'll have the confidence of knowing it's done right. From free expert design help to our 100% satisfaction guarantee, everything we do is made to fit your life and your windows. Shop up to 40% off with minimum purchase and a free professional measure right now at Blinds.com. Plus, pay at your own pace starting at 0% APR with Affirm. Terms apply.
Need a laptop that's built to perform and designed to last all day? Select Windows 11 PCs starting at $499.99 are now at Best Buy. Learn more at bestbuy.com. Best Buy. Imagine that.
Quiet, Riot.
You have some experience of Healey at the Treasury. I think you must have coincided a little bit in the sort of mid-2000s to late 2000s when you were at the Economic Service, and he was a junior minister in Brown's Treasury and then Darling's. So you have, I guess, some indirect experience of him. Do you think the appointment declares a particular economic direction?
When John Healey had the various positions in the Treasury, I was actually working for the Department for Trade and Industry, which then was renamed something else. But I was working very closely with the Treasury. And the one good thing about John Healey getting this job is that he does know how the Treasury operates and what the restrictions are. And I have been asked this before, since this announcement, because he's perceived to perhaps coming from the outside was such a surprise. And yet he actually does understand the Treasury because he's been there in a couple of different positions. And he understands the pressures. So I think it's actually a very, very good appointment from that point of view. Having somebody who has never worked in the Treasury would be an issue. But of course, a number of the other names that were suggested did have a lot of experience in the Treasury, particularly Ed Miliband. So you do have somebody in John Healey who should understand what is happening. But the most important thing about being Chancellor of the Exchequer is to have the standing which the Treasury officials will accept as someone they should listen to, because it's quite easy for someone to come in with no real experience, whether they're an economist or anything else, but haven't actually worked in the Treasury or have had senior positions, ministerial positions there, and then the Treasury takes over. So you can't actually argue your case. Or you can't sort of question various things. So people like Rachel Reeves brought in her own advisors to do work on productivity and so on. There is so much work done within government on all this. You don't need that extra. You know what's going on. You know what works. The evidence is so obvious. The important thing for the Treasury is to use it and then also work well with other government departments. So the other thing I'm reassured about is that we're going to have a stronger Department for Business, which is now taking on all sorts of extra responsibilities as well. With Jonathan Reynolds coming back, one department disappearing, but everything coming into the Department for Business. And I think that's good because then you have a strong department talking to another strong department with somebody like Healey, who understands the pressures that are being faced
Yeah.
and who does want growth. I mean, he does, I'm sure, believe that spending on defense will also encourage growth. And that is something that needs to be expanded more and done in the right way so that it does lead to that growth rather than just a lot of spending that goes nowhere.
Yes, because ultimately, that's the answer to almost everything we're discussing. I mean, we have got, I feel, into a pattern of presenting defense spending as in competition with welfare. And I'm not sure that's a fair binary. There are loads of departments that get big budgets. And yet, in terms of finding the money for defense, it always seems to come down to this notion that there are millions of people feigning health conditions that need to be walloped in order to sort of make more missiles, which seems to me quite an absurd reduction, really, of the issue, doesn't it? I mean, if you could stimulate growth properly and increase productivity properly, both spending envelopes can go up, can't they?
Of course they can. But people can argue that quite a lot of what goes on welfare needs to be tackled because people should be able to survive without that or get back into work, even though a lot of the welfare budget goes to people who are at work. So the question is, how can you change in such a way that these things take time? And that's the important thing. They can't be sorted out overnight. And with the aging population and everything else, post-COVID, I'm afraid those pressures are increasing and they are open. So there are all sorts of ways in which you can tackle it by making eligibility tighter and so on. And there are suggestions that have been made both by the OBR, the Institute of Fiscal Studies, and others. So there is a way of tackling it, but it is a problem that needs to be dealt with in its own right.
Yes.
But I think you're absolutely right. The defense needs to be looked at differently as an issue by itself that needs to find the right money to go into the right areas. How do you find that money? Do you do it by cutting welfare? No. I mean, unfortunately, what's happened so far is that lots of government departments have been asked to just cut their own spending, particularly capital spending in various areas.
Mm-hmm.
We've seen that some of the money that was found, the 10 billion extra, which was announced in the defense expenditure plan, came from cutting capital spending in areas like, improving school buildings or improving the houses of military personnel,
Yeah.
as well as the cuts within government departments that they were asked to do in any case, both on their capital and also the current spending that they do, which in many ways makes very little sense because capital spending is meant to be something that you can borrow for within the fiscal rules and spend in a way that increases your assets. And you absolutely need to improve the assets you've got.
Mm-hmm.
If you let them deteriorate, it's going to cost you an awful lot more later.
Yeah.
And the other
And
thing is
it affects productivity.
Well, you're absolutely
I was
right.
looking at a chart today that we have, I mean, by a country mile, the slowest internet speeds from any sort of near comparator country. I mean, our average broadband speeds are half that of France. And you look at areas like transport and things like that, and then it actually, low productivity becomes less of a head scratcher. It is quite obvious when you look at the aging infrastructure why our productivity is dropping off. And so to suck money away from that to put into defense just makes the pie smaller.
You're absolutely right. And of course, one Nobel Prize laureate said that productivity isn't everything, but it's almost everything. So we've got to bear that in mind. And you're correct in your assessment. So the question about defense is, how do you fund it? And if you fund it by either cutting other things, as we've just been discussing,
Mm-hmm.
or by raising taxes, which of course mean again that you take things away from one part of the economy and put it into somewhere else. It may benefit defense stocks, but it's not going to help the economy generally. There may be some crossovers and trickling down because of more spend on technology and so on. We've seen that happen in the US. But in reality, the thing that works best, according to some people, is to borrow for that extra defense because it's capital, and that then doesn't take away resources from elsewhere.
Mm-hmm.
Assuming you can convince the markets that this makes sense. And this is why, I was a bit worried that a lot of the Andy Burnham off-the-cuff talk, supposedly, even though there were things that he had rehearsed a number of times before, in front of number 10, when he was taking over as Prime Minister, didn't really mention Europe. And yet, a lot of what we need to do is link up with the European defense borrowing capability, which is being set up. And also, of course, the interesting thing is that John Healey, when he was defense minister, did suggest bonds. In other words, he's talking about borrowing more. And by borrowing in a way that doesn't really affect our debt position internationally too much, because it's a little bit like what has been going on traditionally in places like Japan and elsewhere, with huge debt to GDP ratio, but where they borrow from the population and get the benefit, if you like, of better defense in the future. And because it all happens and there's growth, they also get recompense because of those bonds that they buy. So you could have something like that. And so I'm encouraged, actually, once again, about the appointment. And I hope that a lot of that will be rethought.
Yeah. Naomi, when we were chatting last night, suggested that there was also something else in appointing Healey in that position because of his background at the Treasury, the sort of briefs he used to hold, and his background before that with the unions, that there's almost implicit this idea that you make defense part of the reindustrialization that Andy Burnham is talking about. And that way, not only are you not taking money out of the economy, but you make defense part of that growth. You make defense part of that improvement in productivity. Is that a sound idea, economically speaking?
Yes. And the interesting thing, of course, as we know, is that he was very involved with the trade unions. He was campaigns director of the Trade Union Congress. So that gives him, if you like, the respectability from the unions, which I think is good news. But of course, a lot of that defense spending, this is why the unions will be interested in this, and Andy Burnham, will be happening in the regions. So a lot of the benefit will go also to the regions. We talk about reindustrializing manufacturing, just look at where, some of the ships are being built or were meant to be built, and everything else that you can think of. A lot of advanced manufacturing, which is absolutely needed, is happening outside London. So that will indeed reinforce the Burnham sort of deindustrialization and also regional equality, and growth with whichever postcode you're in. So you're absolutely right. But if you do that by just taxing extra or cutting quite a lot of other things that are right now important to ensure that the consumer feels confident, that businesses feel confident about spending in order to fund some of that defense, then you just negate that improvement that would happen, particularly given that the cost of leveling up is now so much higher post-COVID than was the case before. So you need something perhaps imaginative, and perhaps defense will give you that, even though there are lots of people who say, why do we need to bother? We're not going to make very much difference in the world, so defense spending by even doing whatever it is that we plan to do. Nevertheless, there is a big supply chain impact that can happen in the UK because the defense industry in Europe needs us. And I think that the procurement side will be really important if we link up properly with Europe. I think there is an element here where defense makes such a good case for getting closer to Europe, and I think that should not be forgotten. And hopefully John Healey will push down that route.
I mean, it's not particularly an innovative idea, but I guess it feels innovative because no one else has been saying it for a long time, is the idea of a big program of council house building to ease pressure on the welfare bill in terms of billions and billions of money not going to housing benefit that goes to private landlords. Is that a sound idea, do you think?
Yes, but of course there was supposed to be this 39 billion fund, which would be going mainly, I think, to housing associations, but also to developers and local councils, which was meant to be encouraging the sort of building of affordable housing.
Yeah.
Of course, you can now possibly use all that fund, if necessary, for council building. Of course, it relieves the pressure on developers to also have affordable housing attached to whatever they develop.
Yeah.
But it may still leave a bit of a gap. So there is a lot of argument now there has been from before, with a different hat I have on at Radix. We have a housing commission which was suggesting that all that money, the 39 billion, should be moved into the capital spending side, so you don't have a restriction. You don't cut other things while you're building those council houses, or even if you were using that for affordable housing.
And I mean, if building is not capital spending, I don't know what is.
Well, you're absolutely right. And of course, the other interesting thing about house building, whether it's council taxes or anything else, is that it has very big positive impact on the regional economy. Because what you tend to do is you use labor from the region, from where you are. A lot of the materials, yes, you're importing a certain amount, but a lot of what you do in terms of putting it all together, whether it's your, all the materials that you used, for your bricks and everything else, in order to assemble it and build the house. Yes, some of it is prefab. That's increasing in percentage, but nevertheless, a lot of local labor and material is used when you engage in house building. So it has this added sort of positive impact, which again adds to the Andy Burnham idea of what this country should be doing in the future. So I think that also should not be underestimated.
Quiet, Riot.
If data management is slowing down your business, you need the Intuit ERP. If one entity is here, and one here, and one here, and one here, you need the Intuit ERP. If scaling your business feels like starting over, you need the Intuit ERP. Intuit Enterprise Suite is the AI-native ERP solution that consolidates, migrates, and automates, all in one place. Learn more at intuit.com/ERP.
Quiet, Riot.
What about Emma Reynolds? She's been put in as Treasury Secretary. I think that's a very underestimated position because a lot of the time, especially around the big set pieces, the Chancellor it goes a little bit into a tunnel, basically, to finish this stuff. And the Treasury Secretary very much becomes the public face of number 11. And so I think it's quite an important position. Do we know much about her? Do we know anything about her general philosophy?
Well, I mean, she's moved from DEFRA. Before that, she had spent some time in a Treasury position again.
Mm-hmm.
So she knows the financial sector, she knows the city, she knows Treasury, she knows all about how Parliament works.
She knows Brussels very well.
She knows Brussels well. She had, I think, been involved in links between the EU and the UK before, because, of course, when she was around as an MP before, we were still in the EU.
Before that, she was, I think, Robin Cook's right-hand person. So I think that's her strongest, biggest link to Europe.
Indeed. So if you add it all together, I think it's a very good appointment. Yes, you could say it's a bit of an across move, and of course, running a big department is different to being a minister in the Treasury and not the Chancellor. But she may have a lot of influence, and the fact that links with the EU are going to be essential if we are to get the growth back. And I think Andy Burnham, if you look at what he has said before, is very keen on that as well. I mean, he has altered a little bit his language for the time being, but it has to be a very significant part of what this new cabinet and government does.
I think it's an interesting model, Vicky, having people in the Treasury that understand how the Treasury works and understand how government works, understand how Whitehall works, and having actually quite a lot of economic expertise in other departments. You know, we've seen Miata Fanbule go to energy. Ed Miliband is going to be Foreign Secretary. And so maybe you get the best of both worlds, if that makes sense. Maybe you get proper cross-departmental working because you have people in departments that understand how the economics of it works and then can present a better case to the Treasury rather than having all of the economic expertise centered into the Treasury so that they just say no, 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 no to everyone because they know better.
Can I say that the economic expertise, although it may look like it's centered in the Treasury, actually it isn't. It's spread across the various departments. And this has always been a point of contention, if you like, among the departments, that they do a lot of the work in terms of the evidence, which occasionally the Treasury officials and economists were there perhaps sort of either ignore because their master says so or have different ideas. So there is a very, very strong economics capability in the Government Economic Service, of which I used to be joint head. It has increased, if anything. So all that is good news. And this is really why there was this talk of having maybe an economics department with us, Treasury, which just does perhaps funding various things, or does the budget and is involved in selling the gilts that are needed in order to fund whatever it is that the government has decided we should be doing based on evidence. And that's the important thing. The point that I wanted to make is that if you know how much capability there is in the departments outside, and you're a strong enough a Secretary of State who is respected also in the Treasury, then you end up with the best outcome. So there has to be compromise up to a point, because obviously resources are always limited, but nevertheless, acceptance of the evidence is the number one indicator, I think, of a well-run country, which at times hasn't happened because ideology takes over. So maybe the ideology of this particular cabinet will be linked with each other, so that we don't have things happening in one department that completely kill what has happened elsewhere in areas such as trying to improve productivity. We talked about that before. If some harmony can be achieved, and realization that a lot of where the evidence comes from is from other departments, and the Treasury is there maybe to adjudicate up to a point, but also to assist rather than be contrary all the time, I think that would be such an improvement.
So what should be at the top of Healey's in tray in terms of lowest hanging fruit possible to increase growth, to stimulate the economy, to maybe in the medium and long term even help productivity? Like, if you were advising him, if you were by his side, what would be the one or two things that you would say, do that right now?
Okay, well, do that right now is improve relationships with Europe and have that summit that summit that's been postponed. I think that's really important in terms of the indication you're giving to business. The second one would be to look at the cost of businesses. You did touch on the cost of electricity and energy, which is so high. Dealing with that as quickly as possible would be useful. The third one would be look again at other types of costs, such as the national insurance contributions increase and the way in which it has particularly penalized the employment of people at the lower end of the pay scale and productivity, which is a real problem. Because yes, of course, there was this idea in the previous government with a number of people who were involved in advising the Chancellor and Keir Starmer that the way to improve productivity was to just eliminate all the low productivity jobs. It doesn't work. It just causes more cost to the exchequer, because you have to keep these people somehow or other through the welfare bill. So make sure that there are these jobs there, because they can move into different jobs in the future which are more highly productive. We do depend on retail and hospitality, which had been left out of the industrial strategy. A lot of that needs to happen, and it needs to be properly indicated in the forthcoming budget that this is an area of relieving cost pressures on businesses, because without that, whatever else we do, it's not going to help growth in any sustainable way. Because one thing needs to be remembered. Yes, of course, we had a little bit of a recovery in manufacturing in the last few months, but services are not doing particularly well. But the growth in the economy that we have seen over the last couple of years, which the government keeps saying has kept us at the top, supposedly, of G7 growth, at least for one quarter, has come from extra spending by the public sector. So it's government spending. It's not private sector really re-energizing itself. The private sector has been cautious, has not really been investing in any serious way, has not really been hiring in any serious way, and you need to just change that mood through whatever measures you can think of. Some of them are indicated already, in order for that growth to happen.
Vicky, as always, it's been an absolute pleasure chewing the fat with you. Thank you very much, and we'll speak very soon. I'm sure we'll have you on the full episode so we can talk about how this government's economic strategy is taking shape in a bit more detail, and if they have any sense, the budget will be an early autumn one this year. Wouldn't you agree?
Yes, I think the suggestion now is early October.
Yeah.
I mean, we had gone as far as late November.
Yeah, I mean,
before,
right after conference season makes perfect sense to me. Part of the problem for the previous administration was created by the fact that the budget was so late in the year. It left so much empty space for speculation and insecurity. And I think the more you can do to bridge that gap, the better, surely. Thank you, Vicky. Thank you for coming on.
Thank you very much. Talk soon.
Quiet Riot.
I would like to think that after that discussion, you feel in some way better informed about the plans, still emergent as they are, of this version of the Labour government. Economics is, in many ways, the discipline that has captured and subordinated politics. It likes to pretend to be as solid and undeniable a science as physics, but in truth, it contains a lot of assumptions and expectations, even hope. The best economists will freely concede this. But economics is also still the most educated way of predicting what happens tomorrow if one does a thing today, of assessing the risks in different approaches, of trying to affect large-scale behaviors by offering carrots and sticks, and sharing the logic behind which thing, which risk, approach, carrot or stick a government has chosen. Understanding that logic can not only explain the world, but make everyone more of a stakeholder in it. If you like what we do here at Quiet Riot, please support it. We have a live show next week on the 30th of July at the Leicester Square Theatre in London. There is a link in the show notes, and we would love to see you there. If you can't make that, we do have a way you can subscribe to this podcast and help us financially. Go to ko-fi.com/quietriotpod for more details. I will be back on Thursday with Naomi and Kenny, plus a very special guest for the main episode. Until then, you know what you're doing.
Quiet Riot.
Quiet Riot is an audio production from Cooler Heads, written and produced by Andreou, Naomi Smith, and Kenny Campbell. Music by Mariana Sangeeta, artwork by Simona Canellu, and edited by me, Alex Reese.
Quiet Riot.
Well, didn't you read the Financial Times this morning?
Never do.
Well, you're a banker. Surely you read the Financial Times.
Can't understand it. Full of economic theory.
Why'd you buy it?
Oh, you know, it's part of the uniform. Took me 30 years to understand Keynes economics. Then when I just cottoned on, everyone started getting hooked on these new monetarist ideas. You know, I Want to Be Free by Milton Schulman.
Milton Friedman.
Why are they all called Milton? Anyway, I've only got as far as Milton Keynes.
Maynard Keynes.
I'm sure there's a Milton Keynes.